Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Pin here. Today, instead of going out to take photos, which hopefully I'll be able to show you next week where I'm headed off to, not going to say yet, I'll just show you guys next week. But for today, if you saw a video a couple weeks back where I showed you how I edit my photos, I used both Lightroom and Photoshop. And it caused a bit of discussion. Which one is actually better, Lightroom or Photoshop? And the answer is it depends on what it is you want to get out of it. Now, I'm not in favor of either one because both are both are great software packages for editing your photos, but it purely depends on what it is you want to get out of each package as to which one is better. All right, so what I'll try and do is I'll try and explain the pros of each one that I use, both Lightroom and Photoshop, and why I use them. And because I use them for, like, a pro in Lightroom is a con in Photoshop and vice versa. And that's why I'll try and explain it as best I can for you. We'll start with Lightroom because that's where I do the bulk of my workflow, so to speak. And then we'll finish off in Photoshop because there's a few tools Photoshop offers you that Lightroom just doesn't match up for. I won't go into too much detail right now, but you'll see what I mean when we get there. One of Lightroom's great strengths is in its cataloging features. The thing I like with Lightroom the most is if I've gone out and I've taken 400 pictures, I can import those photos into Lightroom. As it's doing that, you can go do something else in the interim, but then when those photos are there in your catalog, depending on whatever system, whatever workflow system you've got, it's easier to cull those photos in Lightroom than through Photoshop, Explorer, or any other software package you can think of, because it's got all of them in that grid layout. Now, I've got a system where if I've done exposure bracketing, I'll first color code those in yellow and red in alternating colors. That way I know this is one set, that's another set, and so on and so forth. And then from there, I'll take those photos and I'll go through and anything that I'm going to edit, whether it's one photo out of that exposure set or just one photo in general, that always gets a 4-star. And I'll go through the entire catalog, all those pictures from that day, and anything I want to keep, just give it 4 stars, and that way I know to keep it there. Anything that's not 4 stars just gets taken out of the catalog so it doesn't clog it up. So once I've done that initial culling, I can then go through again and say, okay, these are the initial pictures I've looked at. Which ones do I actually want to edit? It could be that I'm not sure and I'll just do an edit on one of them and copy it across. See which one I like the best from there, or I'll just go through again and delete a few more, which that just perfectly segues into another great feature of Lightroom, which is if you've edited one photo and you want to see how that looks on exactly the same photo but with slightly different settings, you can literally copy and paste the settings over. You don't have to think, oh, what the exposure did I put, or swap back between the two pictures to try and look for the right settings. You can literally go copy, paste. And that way, it's like, oh, this photo looks better than this photo, so I'll take this photo. Or did I just say that photo's better? Better help here, guys. But either way, that's something that's not easy to do in Photoshop, even with their camera raw filter, because you've got to go back and think, or find a way to memorize exactly what edits you've done and then apply them to another one. So those are few of the great things about Lightroom is that you can organize your photos much more efficiently compared to just Photoshop. You can do edits on them, not just basic edits, but you've also got your graduated filters, your radio filters, your brushes. I've never tested that red eye remover because I hardly take pictures of people. It's always landscapes, and the few times I have taken pictures of people that hasn't been a red eye to remove, I can stop doing that now. But to be able to organize your photos, copy your photos, and do most of your edits on there, if that's where all that your photos need, then perfect. There's no need for you to use Photoshop because Lightroom's got it all. All right, and then that does make the next whole point of my argument mute though. Where Photoshop comes in handy over Lightroom, or not just in handy, but is a more powerful editing tool compared to Lightroom, is in finishing your photos. And there's a few tools in there that you can use. I'll try and explain them as best I can. And the first one is when it comes to cleaning up a photo, because in Photoshop, you can use the clone tool, you can use the patch tool, and its content aware tool to select a particular part of the image that you want to fix up, let its AI do its magic, abracadabra, hocus pocus, and it does an amazing job at cleaning that particular area of the picture up. Whereas if you try to do the exact same thing in Lightroom, what will often happen, what does happen is it takes the area you want to fix, finds something similar, and goes copy paste. Which 90% of the time, unless it's a clear, a night sky with no minimal stars or the ocean or just some grass, it's just not going to work. It doesn't blend properly in most occasions. And if anything, you've probably ruined the photo more than fixed the photo. So for cleaning an image and, removing those little blemishes, so to speak, Photoshop is much better than Lightroom for that. Which also leads nicely into another great tool, very similar to that, in its own right, I should say, which is focus stacking. I have never been able to get Lightroom to focus stack for me, and I think it's simply because it's just not built to do that. In Photoshop, you can either let Photoshop do focus stacking for you, or you can do it yourself. If you're not sure what focus stacking is, or you're not sure how to do it, I'll put a video, I'll link it up here and also down in the description, where I did do a video on how you can do focus stacking in Photoshop quite easily. But with focus stacking, when you have a large landscape scene with lots of elements from the beginning to the back of the image and you want to get it all in focus, it's a lot easier to do that in Photoshop, because you can manually do it yourself. You can get Photoshop to do it, whichever works best for you. I always let Photoshop do it first. If I'm happy with it, I leave it and I finish editing it from there. If not, I'll do it myself. Right, like this one from Camp Cove, I did all of that manually because I know exactly which parts of the image I wanted to be in focus. So I used its masks and layers to go ahead and select the parts I wanted in focus and then have them all sit nicely as everything in focus exactly where I wanted it to be. But where Photoshop really trumps Lightroom for finishing a photo is in Luminosity Masks. Granted, you do have graduated filters and radial filters and whatnot in Lightroom, but to try and replicate that in Photoshop is nowhere near as easy, because I use the TK panels. There's other Luminosity mask packages available. Like I tried the free Lumenzia one at the beginning. Pretty sure it was free. I'm not sure if there's still one there. And I've just seen there's another Luminosity package that's come out. But to try and replicate what a Luminosity mask can do for your image in Lightroom or even in Photoshop's camera raw filter, possible but not easy, and not worth it compared to just going click on like a lights one or a mids one or a dark one on that panel and then being able to tweak it from there. And that's something Lightroom just simply, well, it does offer, but it's not as great. And I like to make my workflow as efficient as possible, because sometimes I come back, I may only have one image from the day I want to edit, I may have 10. And on those days that I have 10, I want to be able to work as efficiently as possible to get through them. Not get through them like a chore, but make sure I'm not spending more time than I need to on editing them because the software package doesn't offer what I need it to do. And that's where Photoshop is great, is that finishing off an image is a lot more flexible in Photoshop than it is in Lightroom. So which one should you choose? It literally comes down to what style of edits you want to do. I've got colleagues who are happy with everything Lightroom's got to offer and don't want to touch anything beyond that, because they look at Photoshop and they think, which granted I was exactly the same. Photoshop's got a much higher learning curve than Lightroom, but as with all software packages and just like with photography in general, the only way to get better is to practice it. So I spent a lot of time watching videos, learning how to use the tools I wanted to use to get the outcome I needed to get, or the outcome I wanted to get. And I'd recommend that you do the same. But if you're happy using Photoshop and you don't want to use Lightroom's catalog features, use Photoshop. And the same with Lightroom. You don't care about using Luminosity Masks and whatnot, stick with Lightroom. If you want to use both, use both. There is no right and wrong. It's just like what I said when I was showing how I organize my photos. Whatever works best for you is the best way to do it. What works best for me may be different to yourself. And at the end of that, I hope everything I've said today makes sense. If you do have any questions about anything I've said today, or got any questions as to whether you can do something in either Lightroom or Photoshop or both, let me know in the comments down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, or reach out to me on my social media channels. I'll get back to you as soon as I can there as well. If you have liked this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. That would be greatly appreciated. And if you do want to see where I head off to next time, because as soon as I finish this, I'm literally going to go pack my camera bag and get it ready. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and make sure you've got that notification bell ready to go, because that way you'll know whenever new videos come out. I'll leave it there for today. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good night.